Brooke looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. She was flushed and disheveled. She held her breath and stood completely still. She knew that the slightest movement, even the most insignificant thought, would make her stomach tingle, and her nerves, stretched so tightly, like a corset, would tremble. She inhaled. My nerves began to ring. She heard a sound in her head. He was loud. She broke eye contact with herself and looked over her shoulder at the reflection of the bed. It was a mess. Her husband lay sprawled among the tangled sheets. Brooke tilted her head, still watching him, and listened to the sounds. Through the ringing of her nerves, the sounds came to her quietly, like waves on the evening breeze. Slow, even breathing. Brooke smiled smugly. He got a good deal from her, and more than once. More precisely, more than twice. She always did this the night before he had to leave on business. She liked to send him away happy and full. She liked, a day or two after he left, to feel in the depths of her soul that trembling that occurs only after vigorous and repeated sex. Emptiness, pain, as if she carried a piece of him with her. And that was important. Continue to feel him while she flirts with other men, while she dances the dance of words. Brooke returned her attention to her reflection. She was amazed. Apart from her dilated pupils and the blush on her cheeks, she looked the same as always. Her hair, dark and shiny, reached her shoulders. Glossy waves framed her face, dark eyes, thick eyelashes, defined eyebrows, full lips and high cheekbones. Attractive, amazing. For some reason, Brooke expected her thoughts to be visible, in her eyes, on her skin, on her lips. She raised her hand and pressed her fingers to her cheek. She felt smoothness, warmth. Her nerves trembled and trembled. She felt sick from excitement. It was like first love, when the anticipation of meeting your loved one becomes almost unbearable. Fear, nausea, and trepidation at the same time. Emotions were running high, alive, floating, like the first blow when prohibited substances enter the bloodstream. A surge of strength. It was so long ago. It had been so long since she had felt this rush. Taboo excitement. God, how she missed this. Brooke looked at her husband again. Part of her wanted him to understand. She truly didn't want to hurt him. But the larger part, the honest part, knew it had to be illegal. She needed darkness. It bloomed in dark corners, in the shadows, in lies, openness, honesty, light, permission. They were her enemies. Brooke swallowed, testing her desire. Not for long. The last 6 months of seduction, of slowly building flirtation, were soon to be fulfilled. Months of words. At first, cautious and questioning, test of strength, and then a delicious, slow, sensual immersion. Dive into sexy words, seductive words, words that made her want to touch herself. Everything led to one end. Fulfillment of her deepest, darkest desires. Desires that her smart, funny, loving husband could never satisfy. And how could he? They were low. He was cultured. They were slutty. He was romantic. They were perverts. He was sophisticated. And she had to meet her husband the next morning for breakfast. It had been a long time since she felt like this. 5 years have passed since the last quenching of thirst. It was like the first time. Last time she became careless. Last time she forgot to be careful, and her husband found out about it, and she hurt him. She almost lost it. It took years to regain his trust. This time she won't let that happen. This time she will be smarter, more cautious. Brooke smiled at herself in the mirror. Thank you, Ashley Madison, for providing a safe place for people like me to meet like-minded people. Brooke closed her eyes and imagined her word dance partner. He was handsome, sexy, reminded her of her husband, a little darker, a little rougher, and much more dangerous. She liked it. She loved this feeling, fear, anticipation, opportunity to be discovered, acceptance of the forbidden. All this, she was Suzette, crepe Suzette, flaming and ready to be served as the most delicious dessert. Brooke was so glad that her future lover was persistent that he took the time to overcome her doubts. Look after her. This should have made the end of their dirty dance even sweeter. Hunter thanked the gods once again for Ashley Madison. This made choosing his prey so boring and easy. When your prey is cheating wives, where else to go but the biggest, most degenerate site of cheating sluts on the planet? He looked at the profiles of the 3 ladies of questionable virtue he was currently following. They all fit his profile. Brown hair that barely reached his shoulders, dark eyes, curvy hips, round buttocks, and large breasts. Just his taste. The hunter wondered which of the 3 would be the first to succumb to his base desires and become his 6th victim. The 5th was only 2 weeks ago, but already now the desire to see how the light disappears from the next lying eyes when it strangles them was becoming more and more unbearable. He took a sip of the bourbon, swirling it around in his mouth before letting it run down his throat, enjoying the burn as he made a bet with himself about which lady it would be. Will it be the one who calls herself Karen? Despite the fact that he had been corresponding with her for only a few days, the girl was hot-tongued. He suggested that he was not the first participant in her rodeo. Less than an hour had passed before he allowed her to look at his photograph. Well, he called it his photography. It was actually someone more attractive, more beautiful than him, but by the time someone like Karen finds out about it, it will be too late. Too late. During the first conversations, he allowed the potential cheater to direct the conversation. The decision about treason should have been theirs. Once the decision was made, he tried to lead them to the desired end goal. A date at their home. Of course, while my husband is not at home. What he liked best was the irony of this scenario. The realization that they are dying on a carefully prepared marital bed, and not having sex on it until they are stupefied. Delightful for him. Not at all amazing for a cheater. Unfortunately, he succeeded only once, with his second dance partner. What was her name? Susan? Sarah? Who cares? She was so stupid that she didn't even realize that he wasn't the guy in the photos. He left her on the bed while he took the suitcase out of his car, which was parked in the garage, and then, going room by room, he deleted her online life. The computer went first, then her tablet from the bedside table, and her phone from the charger in the kitchen, thus removing all electronic traces of herself. Don't make it easy for the cops by giving them your hard drive to search or your browser history to track. They will know about it when it is ready. He put the suitcase back in the trunk and then pulled out a bottle of bleach, gloves, a trash bag, and a small vacuum cleaner. Starting in the master bedroom, he removed the sheets and made the bed with a fresh set. He washed glasses and vacuumed floors, as well as furniture, even those that he did not touch or sit on. You can never be too careful. 3 of the remaining 4 were not as stupid as number 2, but not the smartest either. Instead of meeting him somewhere public and neutral, somewhere safe, they showed up to his motel room like lambs to the slaughter, their minds clearly dulled by lust. They went crazy with the anticipation of being treated ruthlessly. Yes, exactly. His hit rate for Ashley Madison scammers was higher than most because he knew the secret. There were thousands of wives, good girls, who were ladies to their husbands, but they couldn't wait to unleash their inner slut. By hooking up with a stranger who only wanted them for casual sex, they could justify their lecherous behavior by saying they had no choice, and they didn't have to meet this guy for breakfast the next morning. 2 of the 3 walked easily into his dimly lit motel room, but one fussed at the door and had to be subdued when she saw that he was different from the photographs he had sent her. He used a false name and paid cash for the rooms. For each dance partner, a different room, a different motel. He even disguised himself with a blonde wig and stuffed some padding under his shirt to give himself a beer belly. Thoroughness was his middle name, and, as always, after the dance, he removed all traces of himself. Each of his dance partners gave a false name, of course, but they all took their purses with them, effectively giving him their real names and addresses. And the keys to the house. A quick trip to make sure the husbands were out, and those clues gave him incriminating phones, tablets, and computers. He enjoyed his souvenirs so much. In a way, it depressed him how stupid those 5 were, and how predictable the behavior of the 3 he was pursuing was. The next one to fall will most likely be Karen, his last dance partner. But it could also be Monica. He had been dancing with her for months now. She wanted to be looked after, seduced. Pretend that it's not her fault, that she just wants a little forbidden. There was too much hope that the one who calls herself Crepe Suzette would be the next to fall. The persecution lasted the longest. Several months, actually. She was a skilled coquette. She lured her victim and then pushed her away. She painted pictures with her words. She kept dangling carrots, making promises, reassuring her that she was just waiting to make sure her good old hubby didn't catch her. Suzette said she was interested in a long-term romance. She had a long list of kinks she wanted to work on. She described them in vivid detail. The question was, would her kinks mean that she would want her lover to take her in her marital bed when her husband was away? He thought that the likelihood of this was high. What did she write? That's right. There is nothing better than doing dirty things in the marital bed. The hunter foresaw that the day would come when her lust would overcome caution. The kaleidoscope of memories stirred his need for the present to such an extent that it tempted him not to observe carefully calculated precautions. The hunter closed his eyes and groaned. The thought of ridding the world of yet another traitor was like first a sip of beer for a hangover. Brooke looked in the mirror, not at all surprised that her cheeks were flushed and her pupils dilated. She was excited. Brooke looked at her reflection, admiring the way the black lace and satin of her new open-top bra highlighted the creamy smoothness of her skin. She ran her hands down her torso, brushing the lace of the garters that matched her bra. It looked good, sexually. Slowly, carefully, she pulled the thin stockings up her legs, fastening the lace top to the garters. She slipped her feet into black shoes. They were incredibly high and terribly uncomfortable, but her legs looked amazing in them. Brooke stood up, reached down to where she had just been sitting, and picked up a black cloak. She slipped her arms into the sleeves and fastened her belt. The cloak reached mid-calf, perfect for what she needed. It covered her surprise for her lover, but at the same time revealed her slender ankles in stockings. Taking one last look in the mirror and making sure she looked amazing, stylish but sexy, Brooke grabbed her bag and headed to the garage. As she walked down the stairs, she glanced at her watch. Fine. She will come on time. This was the date she didn't want to be late for. The universe had blessed her date, Brooke decided. The traffic was light, rush hour had already passed, and the traffic lights were green all along the road. She thanked the gods for her GPS, since she didn't know this part of the city. Brooke smiled as she pulled into the driveway. Her lover left the garage door open for her. How thoughtful. She stopped next to his car, something gray and smooth, dark and dangerous, just like him. She liked it. The garage door slid down and she checked her makeup one last time. Perfect. She looked perfect. She got out of the car with a smile on her face. Her heart was pounding in anticipation. Her stomach fluttered. She turned towards the sound of the inner door opening. Chief Inspector Burns parked his vehicle behind the police patrol car and switched off the ignition. He sat with his hands on the steering wheel and gathered his courage. Despite 25 years in the police force, 15 of which as a detective, crime scenes continued to pose a challenge to him. Violence, lost lives, lives cut short, the pointlessness of it all. It was worse, of course, when it concerned children, but any malicious death caused him an unpleasant feeling. It's not that he was squeamish. These were questions without answers. Even when the crime was solved and the criminal was behind bars, there were always unanswered questions about the matter, about the reasons, and also those that no one, not even the killer, could answer, those that concerned the future of the victim. Burns sighed. He wished he could still lie in bed with his wife, cuddled up to her in the pre-dawn grayness breaking through the cracks in the curtains. He liked to listen to her slow, calm breathing as she slept. Their rhythm calmed him like nothing else. Kat was his anchor. She gave meaning to the madness that was his working world. She and the children. He was awake when the message arrived. No matter how brief it was, it still made him curl into a ball, Another victim. He swore under his breath, cursing the killer, cursing the lack of evidence, lack of progress in the investigation. He hoped that the latest victim would provide at least some clue. With one last deep breath, he brought his mind back to the present, climbed into the passenger seat, and grabbed the tray of coffee and bag of donuts. Breakfast of champions. Getting out of the car, he paused for a moment, fixing his coffee and donuts. He was trembling. He was glad that he had put on a thicker coat. There was a chill in the air. He walked past a handful of officers lined up searching for clues and headed toward a log cabin nestled in a clearing. He didn't envy the search engines. The morning fog did not make their work easier. He studied the hut as he approached. It was small, perhaps just a few rooms. Apparently, it was used to take a break from the trappings of modern city life. He saw that the door was open, and from inside came the sound of muffled voices floating in the morning air. One more step, and he was standing in the doorway. He examined the interior with an experienced eye. As he had expected, there were only 3 rooms: a combined kitchen-living room, a bedroom, and a bathroom. The officers methodically searched each of them. Everyone was so immersed in work that they did not pay attention to his approach. In the living room, on a large faded carpet, he saw the victim's feet. Her legs were bare. One of the 2 old but comfortable chairs blocked the view. Reg McDonald, a medical examiner, took photographs. Burns hated what happened at the murder scene. The victim was poked, photographed, weighed, measured, and dissected. It seemed like an insult to the victim. Another humiliation. But the dead are powerless. They have no voice, and only in the invasion of their remains is it possible to find justice for them. Burns entered the room. He walked over to the small dining table that doubled as a cutting table in the kitchen and unloaded a tray of coffee and a bag of donuts. Taking coffee and a donut for himself, he headed towards the victim. "Good morning, Reg." Reg raised his head and smiled. It was not a happy smile, more like a greeting to a familiar colleague. "Good morning, Alistair." Chief Inspector Burns smiled back. "There's some for you too when you're ready," he said, pointing to his coffee and donut. "Thank you." "Damn, I hate that smell, Reg. It's enough to make a guy skip breakfast." Despite his words, Burns bit into the donut. Reg didn't need to know that the combination of sugar and caffeine helped calm his stomach. "You get used to it." "How long?" "Faster than you get used to the smell?" Burns saw that Reg was teasing him. "Ha ha ha, time to die." Reg chuckled. Dark humor has been a coping mechanism used by many crime scene investigators. It's hard to say, but judging by the decomposition, probably 10 to 12 days. "Are there any signs of rape?" "I won't know until I get her to the lab and run tests." Both men fell silent. Burns sipped his coffee, grateful for the warmth, and munched on his donut. He was good. I'll have to remember the bakery. He studied the scene. The woman was not wearing shoes, but otherwise appeared fully clothed. Her dark brown hair flowed around her head like a halo. The scarf, the likely murder weapon, hung loosely around her throat, looking harmless. That something so soft and even sensual could be used so cruelly amazed Burns. It looked like she was styled deliberately. Her arms and legs, the angle of her torso, the fan of her hair. It was all too perfect to be natural. Burns suspected that she was similar to previous victims, and that tests on her skin and under her fingernails would show that she had been scrubbed with bleach. It is even possible that the dress she was wearing was not her own, that the killer dressed her in what he brought with him. At least one of the previous victims' husbands said he never saw the outfit his wife was found wearing. Of course, it is possible that the victim herself bought it without telling her husband. Questions. So many unanswered questions. A young, rosy-cheeked uniformed constable hurried towards Chief Inspector Burns, interrupting his thoughts. In his hands, he held a wet suitcase. "Sir, we found it between the shed and the house." Out of habit, Chief Inspector Burns glanced at the constable's hands. "Okay, you're wearing gloves. Look inside carefully, son. There's probably still a wallet in there, right? Don't pull it out or even touch it." "But, sir, if we look in the wallet, There may be some documents there. Wouldn't that help us identify the victim? Yes, it will help, but I want you to stop and think a little. Burns looked the constable in the eyes. He enjoyed mentoring young officers, just as he himself had been mentored in his early days on the force. If we're lucky, the killer looked inside too. We don't want to risk smearing possible fingerprints or tearing out a hair by losing it in a gust of wind. I see, sir. Keys or phone? I don't see anything like it, sir. Chief Inspector Burns sighed. Bag it up and take it to forensics. The young constable nodded. He was in awe of Chief Inspector Burns, who had a reputation as a bloodhound. He wanted to learn everything he could from him. What are you thinking about, sir? Even without seeing what's in her purse, I think this lady is Monica Smith. It's her car, and it fits the description. Her husband reported her missing on the 10th. He returned from the weekend on golf and discovered that his wife and family computer were missing. Then why did it take 12 days to find her? This house belongs to her cousin. The husband did not think about it, since in the last 5 years, they visited it only twice. According to the husband, the wife did not really like hiking in harsh conditions, and the house, as you can see, is isolated and pretty simple. We only found out about this place at dawn this morning, when a neighbor who arrived late that evening got up early to go fishing and noticed that the car parked there had been there since last weekend. He knew the car wasn't, apparently. Owners usually tell him if they rent out a cabin to relatives or friends, so thinking it might be someone who didn't have permission, he moved forward and found the door open. The strangler again, sir? Asked the constable. Chief Inspector Burns nodded sadly. It definitely looks like it. No matter how many times he attended crime scenes, the sight of a life violently taken still touched him deeply. It was his sense of justice that brought him to the police in the first place. Doesn't he usually throw out bodies somewhere in the bushes? It's just an assumption that the killer is a man, a constable. Constable blushed, and Chief Inspector Burns took pity on him. This was likely the young man's first murder scene, and certainly his first serial murder case. But it's a pretty safe bet, son. To answer your question, we know of 6 victims. 5 of them within a 150-kilometer radius of here and another from Melbourne. Only one was found in the bush. It was the last one, so they probably thought it was his modus operandi. But our guy is versatile, adapts to his surroundings. 3 were found in cheap motels, and 1 in her house. He raised his head and once again looked around the interior of the small village cottage. He noted that forensic scientists were still looking for fingerprints and cleaning up dust. And now this one is at her cousin's dacha. The one in Melbourne? Are you sure this is the same criminal? Oh yeah. You see, our smart friend, after killing the victim, takes her phone and house keys, goes into the house, probably after making sure no one is home, and takes all the computer equipment. What the hell? Isn't this a risk? Someone might see him. Yes, it's a risk, but he's gotten away with it so far. No one still remembers seeing anything or anyone unusual. We think he's taking all their computer equipment because he's getting acquainted with his victims online. In fact, I personally believe he met them on Ashley Madison. Why? Why are you sure of this? Chief Inspector Burns was pleased with the constable's questions and curiosity. It reminded him of himself when he had just graduated from the academy. He mentally wrote down the constable's name. He'll look after him. So far, we have not been able to establish any obvious connections between the victims. They did not go to school together, did not work together, did not belong to the same clubs or gyms, and did not even work at the same businesses. Connects, except in appearance. But if you look at everything that unites the victims, you will see that they were all between the ages of 25 and 40. They were all married and had no children. And they all died when their husbands were gone for at least one night. Not only that, not one of them told anyone, not their husbands, not their co-workers, not their friends, not their neighbors, that they were going somewhere or seeing someone. This is unusual. What can you assume, Constable? Looks like they might be cheating on their husbands, boss. Burns nodded, pleased. I think so too. So, the next step. If you don't want to risk being seen with someone at a bar or club, where will you find them? On the internet, sir. Maybe Ashley Madison or Tinder. Chief Inspector Burns nodded. I'm betting on Ashley Madison. This is the biggest site for cheating wives, and our criminal has a better chance of identifying his victims. So our killer meets cheating wives online, possibly on Ashley Madison, then, after killing them, goes to their house, which is their key, and hacks into their computers. Chief Inspector Burns concluded the constable's summary. This way, any electronic trace that might lead us to his identity is erased. Hell, he might even send them photos of himself. Otherwise, they would never trust him enough to meet him. He meets them where that may have been where they were killed, but he may also have met them first in a club or bar. We don't know at this point. But if you think he's meeting them through Ashley Madison, why doesn't he have sex with them? And why not just ask to see their tapas? Until we catch him, we can only speculate about his motives. And, Constable, do you think we haven't thought about contacting Ashley Madison? The constable blushed, embarrassed that he seemed to be questioning his superior's methods. Burns continued, First of all, we have no evidence that this is how he finds his victims. It's just an educated guess. None of the victims advertised the fact that they were members of the club. Secondly, this is an American site, so getting a court order to force collection against them is a more complicated procedure. And last but not least, when we asked them to be nice, they told us to fuck off and not invade their client's privacy. What a creature! Exclaimed the constable, a deep blush spreading across his neck. Sorry, sir. It's okay, son. Sick, degenerate creatures. That's just what we are doing. It's sad to think that they couldn't exist as a business, let alone thrive, without consumer demand. So you're saying all we can do is wait for him to make a mistake, sir? Either he dies, or the thing that makes him do what he does disappears. I wouldn't hold my breath on the last two options. According to our data, the criminal is between 25 and 50, so he still has many years in his life. Stock unless an accident occurs. At that moment, Chief Inspector Burns's phone rang, and he went outside, heading towards the surrounding bush to answer the call. From a distance, the constable could see that the conversation was agitating his employee. Chief Inspector Burns put the phone in his pocket and jogged towards the constable, shouting, "Constable, take care of this. The station just got a call. Last night, a guy came home early from a business trip and found his wife missing. This morning, she didn't return, so he called the station. The wife fits the description of our victims. 36 years old, no children, shoulder-length brown hair. If we're lucky, our killer hasn't yet visited their home and taken the computer." The trip seemed endless. It seemed like every idiot who got a driver's license as a bonus to a bag of cornflakes drove onto the road and decided to slow him down. It took all his self-control not to press the horn all the way. Part of him hoped that when he got to the indicated address, it would turn out that it was a false alarm and that the man had found his wife. Another part hoped that her disappearance was connected with the strangler. He was ashamed of this hope. This hope would mean another death, but he desperately hoped for a breakthrough in this matter. So far, they had nothing. No DNA, no fingerprints, no fibers, no witnesses, nothing. He stopped on the side of the road and turned off the ignition. The house was a large, tastefully restored old building, the bricks painted white. Black and white striped awnings covered the windows and the front door. The finish was black. In general, everything is stylish and Parisian. Burns walked down a paved path lined with shiny black ceramic pots, filled with lush green foliage and a mixture of pink and white flowers. Under other circumstances, he would have photographed the house and the driveway to show Kat. She loved these things. Chief Inspector Burns paused at the front door, silently reminding himself to be patient and compassionate. He had seen this too often in his career. Police officers who saw too much violence, too much bad behavior from their comrades became callous, immune. This made them insensitive and impatient. Burns didn't want this to happen to him, so he always reminded himself that he was dealing with a person who was probably scared, angry, confused, and worried. It was another matter when he interrogated someone whom he considered his criminal. He was hard then. Burns stretched his neck to relieve the tension before raising his hand and knocking on the front door. It opened almost immediately. It was as if the man was waiting for him to come from the other side. The man looked worried, dark circles on his face hinting at a sleepless night. His eyebrows were furrowed and his hair was tousled as if he was constantly ruffling it with his hand. Burns extended his hand and introduced himself. "Did you find her? Did you find Broke?" "Not yet, sir." As much as Burns wanted to get straight to the point and ask about computer equipment, he forced himself to follow procedure. "Can I come in?" "Oh, yes." "Sorry," the man muttered, running his hand through his hair, causing it to stand on end even more. "Sir, I'm sorry to ask you to tell me everything that happened, but I need to hear it from you." The man led Burns into the kitchen and offered him a drink. Burns accepted the glass of water, noticing how the man's hands shook as he poured and passed the glass. "Well, I went away for work and was supposed to be out for a couple of nights, but I finished work early and came back last night. Brooke wasn't home. Her car wasn't there. I wasn't too worried at first, but when midnight came, she still wasn't there. Was at home. I talked to the neighbors who were still awake. Then I started calling our relatives and friends. No one had seen her or heard anything about her. Then I became worried. I called all the hospitals. No one matching her description had arrived." Chief Inspector Burns heard the tension in the man's voice. Poor thing, he thought. He knew how furious he would be if Kat disappeared. "So none of the neighbors noticed what time Brooke left?" Sorry, I forgot." "Yes, Mrs. Jackson from number 35 said that she thought she saw Brooke's car leaving around 7 o'clock in the evening. But she is not 100% sure about this time and says that she didn't pay much attention, so she doesn't know if Brooke was alone or if there was someone in the car with her." "And you tried to call Brooke, I assume?" "Yes, several times, but it always went to voicemail. I left her many messages so that she would call me." "Has Brooke ever done anything like this before?" "No, never." "Sorry for asking this, but how were things between you and Brooke? Did you fight before you left? Any marital problems?" "No. No arguments, no problems. Everything was fine. She kissed me goodbye and waved to me, just like on any other work trip. This may seem a little strange, but I want to ask you if your wife's computer or tablet has gone missing." I don't know. It didn't even occur to me to check. I only checked her purse and clothes. Her day bag was missing, but everything else in our bedroom looks fine. I don't think her stuff was missing." Chief Inspector Burns tried to contain his excitement. "Do you mind if we check that all your computer equipment is still there? This is important." "Fine." The husband looked embarrassed, but led us into a small but tastefully furnished office, where a computer stood in a place of honor. Burns wanted to scream with joy. Finally, a breakthrough. "I need to take this computer to our IT team. Does your wife have a tablet or iPad? If so, then we will need them too." The man left the room to retrieve the iPad, which he said his wife used to read and watch movies. Burns put on gloves and carefully began to disconnect the cables. "Why is our computer and Brooke's iPad important? How will this help in her search?" Burns looked up. He couldn't help but notice that his husband had turned pale and was staring at his gloved hands. "She is dead?" he whispered. "Do you think someone kidnapped Brooke? Killed her?" "We don't know, sir. But one possibility is that Brooke contacted someone online who convinced her to meet him. We won't be able to confirm that until we look into your computer. That's not the only line. Our investigation, we are doing everything possible to find your wife." Burns felt awkward, but didn't want to tell the man that, based on the other victims, there was a strong possibility that his wife was not only cheating on him, but was dead. Until they found Brooke's body, there was hope. There was a possibility that the similarity between her appearance and that of the other victims was a coincidence. "Is there anyone I can call to get in touch with you? Relatives or friends? Anyone you could stay with?" The guy shook his head. "I don't want to leave the house in case Brooke comes home. I'm sorry, but I have to ask this of you. There are a few more questions we'd like to ask, and we have some sketches we'd like you to look at. Images? Who? Sex offenders. Burns watched as Adam's apple rose and fell, and his eyes watered. As Burns had seen hundreds of times before in 100 other murder investigations, the man began to blink rapidly, trying to push his fear inside rather than give in to it in the presence of another person. As a result, the man's face became even paler. Chief Inspector Burns turned and walked towards his car with the constable to give the boy time to get his emotions under control. This was often the kindest thing to do. Burns felt ashamed of the relief he felt when he returned to the living room to find the man looking pale but calm. He once again went to the car with cables, a mouse, a keyboard, and an iPad. Before returning to the house, he called the station and ordered all available officers out of uniform to quietly check to see if anyone was watching the house, and if they weren't busy, then keep an eye on the house. After making the call, he returned to the house and asked his husband to follow him to the station, hoping that the killer would return in the evening, see the house dark, and try to enter the territory. At that moment, the 4 burly policemen he knew were assigned to watch this place would pounce on him, using lethal weapons if necessary. Chief Inspector Burns handed over the computer equipment to specialists after receiving several suggestions from the husband about his wife's passwords. Obviously, the computer belonged to her. Hubby was using a laptop that was kept in his office. This news gave Chief Inspector Burns even more hope that they had finally caught their luck in this case. He thought about confiscating his husband's laptop, but experience had taught him not to jump to conclusions. After all, the biggest killer of women was not a disease, but someone they knew, so the husband couldn't be ruled out as a suspect too quickly. However, his gut told him that Brooke was the strangler's latest victim, so he decided that he would check the guy's laptop after the technicians dealt with his wife's computer. Burns made the guy some coffee and asked him a few more questions about Brooke and the state of their marriage. With each question, Burns tried to focus on the man's answers. He kept glancing at his phone, hoping to see a message from the technicians. Although Burns thought it unlikely that the villain was on their sex offender database, he had his husband look through the database. It was also a convenient way to keep the guy away from his home without causing unnecessary alarm. As expected, no one was identified. Hoping that his time at the station had calmed the man, Burns explained that he was free to go but asked him to stay away from the house until further notice. The husband decided to stay at the station for now, saying that he did not want to deal with questions from relatives and friends. Chief Inspector Burns could understand this. So often a person managed to keep himself together until someone asked him if he was okay. For some reason, this phrase and others like it opened the floodgates for many. The husband had just settled into the interrogation room with a fresh cup of coffee when Burns received a message that they had hacked the computer, and the woman's Ashley Madison profile was an open book. Within another 10 minutes, they had an address where the naive wife agreed to meet the man who had been courting her for 6 months. After that, everything went very quickly. Search warrants were obtained. The teams gathered in readiness, and then came the waiting. Every minute seemed like an hour. There was a slight chance that Brooke was still alive, but that chance was diminishing by the minute. 25 minutes later, Chief Inspector Burns decided that they could no longer wait for the judge's order. He authorized the team to break down the door under imminent danger principles. They found a treasure trove of evidence and a very dead wife. There was no doubt that it was Brooke. They had already found her bag, standing on the table in the hallway. She was alone in the house, lying on the bed in the master bedroom, stretched out, her wrists and ankles tied with scarves to the bedposts. Burns thought he would never again be able to look at a lacy black bra or garter belt and find it sexy. The girl had a bandage covering her eyes, and the detective was glad that someone else would take it off. Burns didn't want to see her open, staring eyes. Dead eyes. He already had enough previous victims haunting him. Burns couldn't help but feel sad. He wondered if she had any warning, any idea that her illicit encounter would end in death. She was strangled. It was obvious. As with previous victims, the killer used a scarf. This scarf was similar to the ones that secured her wrists and ankles to the bedposts. There were no obvious signs of bruising on her arms, legs, or torso, and she was still wearing her underwear. Burns hoped this meant that the strangler had stuck to his modus operandi and that she had not been raped or tortured. The owner of the house, one Nigel Lawson, was nowhere to be found, despite his car being found in the garage along with Brooks' car. Chief Inspector Burns was amazed at how presumptuously this man had left the victim in his home, in his bed. He clearly thought he had all the time in the world to get rid of the body. Perhaps he considered himself smarter than the forces that were trying to catch him, suspecting that Lawson had access to a second vehicle and that later that day or evening, he would attempt to break into the woman's home to take over her computer. Detective Chief Inspector Burns radioed to the officers monitoring the victim's home to be on alert. Afraid to do it himself, Burns sent Sergeant Moira O'Connell back to the station to inform her husband. Many times during his career, he had to deliver bad news, face-to-face with parents, husband, son. He saw that look, pleading eyes that begged him to say it was a nightmare, not true, error. He witnessed immeasurable grief. I saw understanding, awareness in their eyes that their lives had changed forever, that they would never see their loved one alive again. They will never drink coffee together again. They will never laugh at a common joke. He hated witnessing this level of pain. He felt like a bystander, powerless to help. He hated feeling useless. Every time responsibility fell on him, he tried to think of something comforting, but the words did not come. He always returned to time-worn cliches. Burns knew his job was to be part of the wailing sirens and the crime tape. His only help to his loved ones was to find the culprit of their grief. He did this to the best of his ability. Besides, O'Connell was as good a police officer as one could hope to find. When you work with a woman, it says something when you don't notice her appearance, just like you don't notice a guy's appearance. And Moira was a beautiful woman. He knew this from the annual policeman's ball. She was smart and didn't take crap from anyone, but for all her toughness, she knew how to deliver bad news. Burns told himself that she would do a better and kinder job of informing her husband than he would. In addition, men are better at accepting bad news from a woman, as his years in the police force taught him. They had a photograph that the husband had provided earlier, as well as a woman's purse, so they were confident that the victim was Brooke, but the coroner would require 3 forms of identification, so the husband would soon have to attend the identification parade. Burns knew Moira would do a good job of preparing him for this traumatic experience. While he was asking all the usual questions to the crime scene guy, whom Burns didn't know very well since he was a rookie, Moira informed him that the woman's husband had taken the news stoically but poorly, refusing any consultation. He said he needed air and went for a walk, promising to be back within an hour. Senior Inspector Burns coordinated a search of the house for new evidence. It didn't take long for Mr. Lawson to get his computer up and running. Burns could have kissed the young constable who told him this. The case, which had been languishing for lack of leads, was now awash with them. The computer was packaged and immediately delivered for examination. A few minutes after the computer was sent away, another discovery was made in the guest room. 6 identical carry-on suitcases were stored in a built-in closet in the room. Each suitcase contained a collection of computers, tablets, and phones. Lawson made it easier for them to find evidence in the case. The guy clearly kept the computer equipment as trophies. Even better, each suitcase came with a pair of panties, sealed in a Ziploc bag. Burns was confident that the DNA would match that of their victims. Burns began to breathe a little faster, with a hint of rush as he exhaled. Almost laughter. Almost a cry of triumph. A search of police records revealed that Lawson was issued a license to carry a pistol, but no weapon has yet been found. There was also no information regarding his supposed second vehicle. The car rental agencies haven't found anything yet either. A warning was issued that Lawson may be armed and should be considered dangerous. After all, any cornered animal is dangerous. The instinct is always aimed at survival. Chief Inspector Burns assigned additional officers to scour the area around victim number 7's home, since any reason to act covertly had now disappeared. Disappointingly, a second search of Lawson's home yielded no clues as to where the perpetrator worked. No empty suitcases were found either, so Burns sent 2 detectives to check all the stores and department stores that sold items of the same brand as those in the guest room. You never know when you'll get lucky. Lawson may have been purchasing a bag for Brooke's belongings. By 7 p.m., Lawson was still at large. His home was dark. The police had completed their search, and forensics had collected everything they needed. Later, Chief Inspector Burns would reproach himself for not leaving instructions for the second capture group earlier. The gap between the forensic team's departure and their arrival allowed Nigel Lawson to sneak into the house through the back door. Perhaps he was alerted by the damage to the front door. All Chief Inspector Burns knew was that as he entered the back hallway for a final check before leaving the house to the raiding party, he was confronted by Mr. Nigel Lawson holding a pistol pointed at his chest. Burns quickly jumped through the doorway, years of training helping him out. His heart was beating wildly, but his hands were steady. Knowing what this sick bastard had done, these women may have cheated, and as disgusting as it was, they didn't deserve to die for their sins. And knowing how desperate Lawson must be, Chief Inspector Burns missed the usual warnings in the end. After all, there were no witnesses, and again rushed into the hall, crouching, catching Lawson by surprise. Lawson fired in a frenzy, hitting the wall well above Chief Inspector Burns's head. Without hesitation or remorse, Burns returned fire, firing 2 .38 caliber bullets into the middle of Nigel Lawson's chest. Lawson was dead before he hit the floor. Burns approached the man holding a gun in his hand. He looked down at Lawson's surprised but unseeing eyes. Still looking at Lawson, he called the station. Burns waited for the recently departed employees to return. He couldn't stop looking at Lawson. The guy was ordinary. Handsome, yes, but ordinary. Dressed in a business suit, clean-shaven, fashionable haircut. If you met him on the street or in a club, you would not have guessed the evil lurking in him. Somehow this didn't seem right to Chief Inspector Burns. Evil should be like in cartoons, where the villain is always easily recognizable. It should be written on them. But that was not the case, usually not. Most often, evil was clothed in ordinary colors familiar to the crowd, and sometimes even in beauty. Seductive, alluring, like a beautiful flower that hides poison in its core. The sound of a siren broke his thoughts. He was glad. He just wanted to go home and hug his wife and children. It turned out that Chief Inspector Burns had found a gold mine in each of the suitcases. They actually contained the victims' computers, and each of them had an Ashley Madison account where they corresponded with Nigel Lawson in different guises, but all with his photographs. DNA from the panties also matched the DNA of the victims. Lawson's computer was another matter. It, like the victims' computers, showed that he had an Ashley Madison account, but, unfortunately, it only contained information about his last victim. They later suggested that he opened a new account for each victim, one for every hunt. The investigation also later established that Lawson was in Melbourne on business at the same time as victim number 3 was killed. The husband of the 7th victim of the Ashley Madison killer, as Nigel Lawson was later dubbed in the press, walked around the corner of the police station, wiping his eyes. He felt exhausted. He found a small park and sat on a bench in the sun, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Brooke was dead, gone. He will never see her smile again. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. He noticed how the sunlight highlighted the fine hairs on the back of them. He straightened up and raised his hands, clenching and unclenching his long fingers, trying to imagine how they were squeezing the scarf wrapped around the thin throat of his cheating wife. He tried to imagine them tightening the scarf until there was no breath left in her. He trembled, and his mouth tasted of bile. The thought made him nauseous. Then he realized that his irresistible desire died with Brooke. The hunter has taken his last victim. He backed away, his chin dropping to his chest. Relief washed over him. It was all over. It's finally over. 5 years earlier, Brooke had cheated on him. With this discovery, he learned something else. Betrayal does not kill like a bullet to the heart or brain, and it should. It felt like death. Even now, he remembered this pain, the feeling of betrayal that pierced to the depths of his soul, the agony, the rage. Yes, rage. It was all-consuming. She deprived him of sleep. She haunted him every waking moment, inexorably, and always questions. Questions that will never be answered, at least not adequately. Why? Why did she betray him like that? He will never know the real reason. He knew that all the reasons she gave him were tainted by lies. How could they not be? Her answers had a specific purpose. She wanted his forgiveness. She wanted to stay married. At that time, against his better judgment, he allowed himself to be persuaded by those around him to take her back. Give her a second chance. His love for her made him weak, vulnerable, and too open to their arguments. Everyone makes mistakes, they said. She loves you, they said. She's devastated that she hurt you, they said. Ask yourself, they urged him, are you better off with her or without her? Deep down, despite the love, he knew that this was not a mistake. She was spoiled. She'll do it again. It will only be a matter of time before the other shoe drops, before what's left of his heart is destroyed. And that's why he kept an eye on her. On two levels, one is obvious and the other is much more subtle. He hated it. This offended him. That wasn't who he was. And yet he did it. For years. As if taking bitter medicine, he watched her every step, every call, every message. Oh, how he hated that this was necessary. Hated her, knowing she couldn't be trusted. That she would betray him again, will hurt him again. A year ago, thinking he was wrong, hoping he was wrong, he made a grand gesture over dinner at a posh restaurant, announcing that he was canceling all the obvious checks he had been doing. She was so happy and showed it to him later in their bedroom, but even then he wondered if she was thinking about him or if she was reliving one of her past illicit attempts. It was just another unanswered question among many years of unanswered questions. However, knowing her and doubting her, he continued a deeper, more covert observation. Unfortunately, his suspicions, doubts, and fears came true, and he learned that old wounds had not healed. And although his mind, trying to maintain sanity, covered them with scar tissue, the wounds themselves remained. Signs that Brooke was considering a new lover became apparent to him too soon after she thought she was safe. Oh, how it hurt. Old wounds became new again. The other shoe dropped. Déjà vu at its worst. Something inside him broke, died, and someone was born. Something ugly, evil spirits, someone dark, evil, Hunter. After that, all he could do was monitor the Ashley Madison account she had created and watch the lengthy seduction of his willing and constantly flirting wife by an experienced and patient predator. A rudimentary facial recognition program quickly gave him the name of the predator, a certain Nigel Lawson, and the address, after which the real setup began. Finding out where a guy drinks and then befriending him to learn about his business trips and other movements was so easy as to be a no-brainer. Nigel, or the Predator, as he preferred to be called, during one conversation provided him with the defining moment in his setup, a business trip to Melbourne. It's too easy to arrange a trip to coincide with the timing. For a man who was completely untrustworthy, he himself was gullible, or simply stupid, leaving his keys and wallet on the bar while he made his way across the room to chat with another woman. He had plenty of time to take both to the men's room, take an impression of the house keys, and check the address. When the slug started bragging to his new drinking buddy about all the wives he'd seduced and slept with, it took all of his iron self-control not to wait at the bar and strangle the scumbag then and there. But, deprived of love, all he has left is self-control. Much of the joy left his life the first time his wife stuck a knife in his back. Before this betrayal, he was a gentle person, soft-spoken. He loved the theater, art, a good book, and other more cultural things in life. Now this joy, this gentleness, has disappeared. The hunter was surprised that his wife did not notice the change in him. After she got caught the first time, she became defensive. and it was only a matter of time before she tried to regain her primacy by cheating again. As boring as it was, he was right. It was as easy as pie. Copy the predator's profile photo and create your own account on Ashley Madison. He used proxies and the like to cover his tracks, making it appear that he was the predator. It's easy if you know how. He, under the guise of Nigel, administered justice for the sake of other devoted husbands. Will they thank him? Most likely not. His justice was a double-edged sword, because it meant they would learn of his wife's treachery. But this was not enough. Nigel Lawson had to pay for his crimes, for his cavalier disregard for the marriage vows of his conquests. The task of luring Lawson out of his own home so that the hunter could kill his own wife was, in the end, simple. Nigel turned out to be as predictable as his victims. All he had to do was create another profile on Ashley Madison, this time as a woman, under the name Brandy. 20-something, mixed-race, bored wife looking for a little excitement. Of course, it's completely fictional. A visit to various stock image sites provided plenty of bikini-clad, cafe latte-skinned girls with languid, sultry looks to choose from to pique Nigel's interest. Upon closer examination, it would be possible to discover that they were not all the same person. But the hunter knew from his own experience that people were very good at deceiving themselves when they wanted to. They saw what they wanted to see. They say that love is blind, but he discovered that lust is responsible for the same disease. Having prepared a trap, he simply agreed with Nigel to meet Brandy at a motel an hour away, on the other side of town. The first meeting was supposed to take place at 8 p.m., but a message sent through Ashley Madison around that time and every hour thereafter, sent via the email snooze feature, kept the frustrated ladies' man at the motel until the morning. Hunter watched as he drove from the motel to work. He didn't look happy. The hunter was proud of his tracking abilities, but the person hiding behind the mask is not very good. He knew his wife would eventually succumb to the temptation of Nigel fucking Lawson. This was evident in her words and messages. Her lust in black and white on the screen. She wrote to Lawson things that she had never even hinted at to him, her husband. She never gave him a chance to become what she needed. Each sordid revelation was yet another poisoned dagger in his already broken and rotting heart. He had to kill her, a version of her, over and over again. It was the only thing that helped cope with the pain. Fury. They were also traitors, killers of their husband's love, their trust, just like Brooke. But this had to stop. Brooke. How easy it was, after all, to lure her to Lawson's house. It only took one message. He pretended to be Lawson. "It's now or never," he said. She arrived practically running. She boldly drove into the garage. She came out from behind the wheel, smiling and confident, like a model. But her smile did not last long. Not for long. All she wore over her slutty underwear was a cape and high heels. She came ready for sex. In the end, she turned out to be a cliché. The rage he'd felt when he saw her, eager and anticipating as she turned to face him in Lawson's garage, rushed through him, but he pushed it away. Time has passed. It was all over. He was a free man, free in every way, free from coercion to punish, free to live your life. Now, for the last time, he mentally went through the puzzle pieces he had provided to the police, looking for flaws that could lead them to him. This activity reminded him of the work of an editor, checking and double-checking storylines, chronology, the smallest details. The hunter was good at his job. Helpful. Sergeant Moira O'Connell told him they were keeping an eye on Nigel's house, probably hoping the news would reassure him. He knew from Lawson's boasts, when he was his drinking buddy in the pub, that Nigel had a gun. The hunter could only hope that Lawson would act in accordance with his arrogant macho nature and be shot in a shootout with the police. But, on the other hand, the alternative in the form of his long and unhappy life in prison was also very attractive. The hunter nodded. Any of the options would suit him perfectly. At that moment, Hunter's phone rang, and he leisurely reached into his trouser pocket to take it out. "Hello, Brown Publishing Service, this is David Brown." Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.